Welcome back to nCino's conversation series on artificial intelligence. With me today is Will Jung, nCino's Chief Technology Officer. Will, welcome. You worked at Macquarie Bank for over 15 years before coming to nCino back in 2024. Tell us a little bit more about your background and how that informs your approach to your job at nCino every day.
Thanks, Greg. Happy to be here. Yeah, so I started my career as an engineer at Macquarie Bank, and throughout my career, then transitioned into more product and transformation roles, and really across core banking, payments, mortgages, commercial and corporate, lending and deposits, and wealth management. So pretty much across the entire banking landscape. But I've always been at the intersection of banking and technology, and really how technology enables banking experiences and outcomes. And so, yeah, I'm now glad to be here in nCino, really driving the same outcomes there, but for all our customers across the world.
Well, we're certainly happy to have you. And again, I think you bring a very unique background, having worked at a large financial institution, to nCino. Obviously, you understand the challenges and the opportunities they have, and really puts us in a unique position to address them. Today, I want our listeners to really walk away with a better appreciation for how nCino's foundational work over our history to solve regulatory challenges for our customers and the data nCino has aggregated over many years make for highly differentiated competitive advantages. With that in mind, I have a few questions for you today.
Cool.
And we'll start with on our fourth quarter fiscal 2026 earnings call. Sean talked about data from almost 500 financial institutions representing $11 trillion in assets. Can you tell us a bit more about what that data set represents and how does that data asset contribute to our AI strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question, Greg. And when I think about the amount of data that we have and the customers have trusted us with to learn from and also to build our product, I think there's a couple of things that I think about. One is really understanding how banking is done under the hood, right? I think banking is obviously incredibly complex with all the regulatory requirements in terms of what we need to do from a lending or a deposit perspective. And so understanding that usage data, right? Understanding what best practice is, and understanding where in our product can we actually make it easier for banking to be done. So I think that's one that I'll look through. And then being able to benchmark that, obviously from an anonymized basis across different segments and industries, allows us to really hone in on what's the best value for our customers. And that really defines our product strategy and really contributes to that. And then when I think about what we can do with that data as well is we're able to use that asset to build proprietary models, machine learning models that really then makes that experience of banking, especially for employees of those banks, a lot easier. All right. And I think that's incredibly powerful. That's something that I believe that's a data set that the rest of the industry doesn't have.
Yeah, and I know we hear that from our customers in our discussions with them as we talk about AI and the value that we can bring uniquely and the intelligence that we can provide them in their day-to-day activities. That data asset that we've accumulated really resonates. And when you think about that, in the conversations again we have with customers from a competitive perspective, what advantage do we have that maybe a bank trying to build an LOS to the extent, there's still some maybe that try, or even a
Mhm.
new competitor trying to do that, that they would struggle doing?
Yeah, I think one of the advantages that we have, and just going back to, I guess, the proprietary models that we've got using that data, is the ability for us to really glean the best practice across hundreds of banks of institutions globally, right? Global best practices inbuilt in products. So I'd say that's a definite one there, right? The others I would say is then using those models, then we can actually deploy those across individual customers and still have those models learning from those customers' data, right? So it becomes your model, but the foundation is built on industry best practice. And I think that's something that you really, as a single institution, it's really hard to replicate that, right? So I'll say that's one. The other is the scale that we build our product, right, with those data assets. So not only do we think about the data that we hold, but how we hold the data, right? From a security perspective, the governance perspective, how we apply that from a compliance perspective is really, really important. And being able to do that at multiple regions, across the globe is something, again, I think that's going to be lessons that we have learned and we've done that at scale and we can prove that we are doing it today. And then the third part I look at is how we decide to apply agentic and AI across our platform. Because I think if we understand how banking is done from a best practice perspective, I believe we've also got insight in terms of where agentic process actually makes sense, right? Because not everything needs an agent, not everything needs AI applied to it. And so being able to understand that at different stages, understanding where the rework happens, understanding where there's actually complex inefficiencies, right? Where there is actually a lot of information gathering, right? And intent understanding that you need to do in a bank. It allows us to rethink the entire workflow from industry data that we've collected and that best practice, right? And I think that's something, again, a single institution is very hard to replicate.
Yeah, and from a competitive perspective, again, if you look at the customer base we have on a global basis, financial institutions of all sizes, whether it be community banks, credit unions, regional banks, global
Hmm.
banks, quite unique as you look across the competitive landscape. And I think that positions us quite well as we lead the market in AI-powered banking.
Hmm.
Touching upon your compliance comment, regulators, auditors, and compliance officers are obviously nervous about AI and lending decisions.
Hmm.
How do we provide at nCino satisfactory answers and reporting when an examiner asks, why the AI did something?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that's one, especially in a regular industry like banking, is critically important, right? And so what I go back to is first is our product principles, which I talk, kind of touched on in our previous answer, is making sure we understand when we are using AI and why first. I think that's really critically important. Like, why are you using AI or an agent to do a certain task, right? Once you understand that, then you need to understand, well, at what level of autonomy do you give to an agent, right? Whether it's do you allow it to make certain decisions or you don't allow it to make certain decisions. Okay. And I think that's important. So really, and that's really where we see the dual workforce concept come to life with nCino, is we believe that uh, agentic banking is really unlocking the skill set of your workforce, right? Being able to focus on the judgment calls and the banking. And so when we build a system, we need to make sure that human is in the loop or human is on the loop, as we call it as well, from a scale perspective. So everything from observability on prompts, like making sure we understand what's being prompted from an agent perspective, what the response is, all the actions taken by the agents, right? Every tool that it calls, why is it calling a certain tool, right? And making sure that we are able to show to institutions at what risk levels an agent is operating at, right? Is it making a final decision? Is it not making a decision? It's actually guiding a decision, providing insight. All of that and being able to observe that and being able to provide that visibility always on at 24/7. And that's critical, right? And that's how we think about it from an nCino perspective.
And that really resonates. And I know our customers, embrace the approach that we take, right? Helping them comply with the various regulations that they need to comply with. Continuing to kind of drill down on this data theme, can you talk about what our policy is around training data? And specifically, can customer data be used to improve shared models? And how is consent and data sovereignty managed?
Yeah, and it's a good question, a question that we get asked all the time from all our customers, as you can imagine, being in an industry like ours. So what we can say is no. When we create our own predictive models, so these are predictive machine learning models, we only use data from the customers who've consented to the use of their data. So that's really important for us. But really that's important for us because we use that data, one, to do the predictive models, but also we embed that back into the experience. So there is that value exchange. So when customers provide the consent to use their data on an anonymized basis, they can see there's value being put back into the product that actually makes them get their customer outcomes a lot faster and quicker with nCino. So I think that's point one. We don't train any foundation models. We do use and partner with foundation model companies, obviously. But because of the way they were architected on AWS, it makes sure that no customer data leaves any of the trust zones to train the models. The models remain as is, and the data doesn't flow out into them. And that coupled with what we've always been, we're multi-tenant, multi-region, with trust zones established globally, and that's really our stance on data sovereignty and making sure that data governance is tight when we're using AI.
Got it. Um, let's turn to the third-party AI providers, the frontier models. Which ones are central to our strategy, and how do we avoid over-reliance on any single one?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And it's a question where a few customers have also asked in terms of bringing their own models, right? And the way really for us, we've partnered with Anthropic from almost the beginning. And Anthropic's usually the main models that we use. We also use a suite of the AWS Nova models as well, as needed. And again, back to the product principles, it's the right model for the right job, right? Sometimes a Haiku is what you need. You don't need to go to a Sonnet or an Opus, as an example. Sometimes we need the Nova models, a Nova Light model, or Nova Sonic from a voice perspective. So make sure we use the right model. Anthropic's been great for us for a couple of reasons because they've been the preferred foundation model for us, not only because of the capability models, which are first class, obviously, but also the principles which they run their company by, on with trust and focus and security. And that's always been something that's aligned with us as a company, right? Now, for us, for out of the box functionality, it's either with the Anthropic or AWS at the moment. But we also leave optionality out there, right? At the end of the day, our architecture enables us to fit any models because we want to make sure that we're always using the right models for the right job. And today, Anthropic and AWS has given us that capability. For the question around when banks ask, can we bring our own models? Um, for now, it's on the roadmap, but right now for out of the box functionality, because our experiences aren't just about the model, right? The model is a component of what it does. You know, with the agents, the context, the tool calling it does. There's a lot of complex architecture that's behind making sure these experiences get the banking outcomes that our customers want. And so we need to make sure that we're providing something that we know we've tested through our evaluations, through our automatic testing, so that we can provide the outcome with trust to our customers. So bring your models. We know some model behaviors are different because we can't run our evaluations over them. BYOM, until we can provide the scaffolding for our customers to do that, right now is on the roadmap.
And tell me if this resonates, because it seems like, again, as we talk about roadmaps, where our customers, they would like potentially, like I should say, the flexibility or optionality to bring
Mhm.
their own models versus, them wanting to do it as we sit here today. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, fair. And flexibility is something that customers have asked us for a lot of times, right? But if you come down to it, really, customers partner with nCino because of certain outcome. You know, they realize they're in the business of banking, all right? And they're in the business of banking, making sure they're getting the banking outcomes for their customers. And it's nCino's job to make sure we get the right technology to do that, right? And so a lot of the conversations that start with BIO model ends up being, well, actually, maybe BIO model doesn't make sense from an nCino context because they bought nCino for a specific task, and they can see how we've built it, and it actually gets the outcome for them.
Yeah. And they look to us to bring them that outcome, and look to us to figure out the best way to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've talked about our predictive models, the machine learning models. Um, Again, I think that's something unique to what we're doing with our data. Does that provide an opportunity for us to deliver more consistent outcomes? Is that one of the advantages as well?
Yeah, for sure. Because the predictive models, they're pre-trained, right, with the anonymized data set we've got from a consent perspective, with the relevant data, and it's frozen at a given version, right? And so what it means then, it's deterministic and it's built on interpretive rules, right? And so the same inputs produce the same outputs from a rank perspective. Um, and then the model then trains on newer loan data in a controlled versioned way, right? And so what that means is a bank can run automatic tests across these models and be able to know what the input and outputs would be, right? Which you can't really do with a large language model. And so from that perspective, yes, it gives us an opportunity, one, to provide consistent outcomes, which is what you need. And this is why we built these predictive models for that perspective. But two, also from a cost perspective, right? A lot of the foundation models use up a lot of tokens to do similar tasks with it when you can do it a much cheaper on a predictive model perspective.
Again, I think that's also something unique with the approach that we've taken to our intelligent unit consumption.
Hmm.
Um, and from a cost perspective, obviously, if it's our own models, the margins are quite a bit more attractive than leveraging a third-party LLM model.
Exactly.
Um, I'm sure much of our audience has experienced AI hallucinations using some of the more popular AI tools available to consumers out there. How do we guard against that and control for intended outcomes when LLMs are utilized?
Yeah, so I'll say one thing is you can't completely 100% remove hallucinations, right? It's just part of the nature of large language models, the way that it is predictive, right? In the sense of it's finding from that pattern perspective. And so what it requires is careful architecting. And I think I go back to our product principles is making sure you understand what LLMs are capable of, right? And they're capable of great things, right? But also the more agency you give it, the more increased chance you give from a hallucination perspective. So careful architecture is really important. So we do it in multiple layers for us, right? One is making sure we're using it for the right way. So a lot of the ways that we use LLMs really is for understanding intent, right? It's when it's whether it's understanding intent from a chat window or whether it's understanding intent from a particular workflow or a job that they're doing on nCino, right? And then making sure that we go, well, okay, do we have the right system prompts in place? Are we grounding on the right context? Because again, agents in a funny way, in this way, again, not trying to make them too human, but this is probably the best analogy I've got, is when you overload someone with too much information, as an example, right? The information overload. Agents can also get that from a context perspective. The context rot is a thing that we talk about in the industry. And so you got to make sure you give the right information, the right context at the right time and the right amount of it. Right. And that sounds very simple when you say it that way, but there is a lot of architecture that will at what point of the workflow, at what point of when an agent is running its tasks and tool calling do you put it that, right? And so tooling is important. And then it goes all the way down to like what tools it uses. Not every tool should use an LLM, right? Some tools can just be code. Like anything computational should be a tool, should be a code, right? And then the orchestration should be explicit. There's deterministic workflows that we put in by design. And so all of that to say, and then we think about it, we take a step back from nCino and think from an experience perspective. As a user interacting with nCino, what's the best way in the banking context to actually get the job done, right? And sometimes that's going to be via chat window. Sometimes it's still going to be a screen, right? That might have chat supplementing it, but it's a different experience, right? And that human in the loop and how you put human in the loop is going to be very important, right? And so lots of different layers there. But I think the most important thing with the banking as well is making sure that the human user, right, and the dual workforce aspect of this understands how the system came to that decision, understands what's been going on, and can make a decision, right? That again leverages the benefits of AI, but doesn't take away the thinking and the judgment of a human. And that's really it's easier said than done, but there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, and then also again, when the regulators come by, be able to support the decision, be able to show
Mhm.
the auditability, the traceability of the decision, right? As they
Mhm.
think about the regulatory compliance aspect, as we touched upon earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah. We also touched upon briefly earlier, optionality and flexibility. And
Mhm.
so, Will, how do you think about interoperability in a world where institutions are partnering with various AI providers and platforms?
Yeah, so I think institutions are probably bombarded right now with options, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But there is a lot of confusion and hype because of that, right? And so I'm still a firm believer of some fundamental and foundational principles, right? I still think a simple architecture is the best architecture. You still need to be able to understand how you're going to manage your enterprise architecture. You need to know how you're going to manage the data flows, the workflows, how work gets done in your organization through the technology that you have, right? And how do you control that to get to your business outcomes? And I think that's especially more pertinent and important in a regulated environment like financial services, right? Where security and trust is paramount. And so I don't think having one provider for all your AI actually makes sense, right? Because of that focus and making sure you understand where the data is, right? And where the system's records are. I still think you need specialist platforms, right, to perform specific business functions for you, right? We talk about context again. We talk about that architecture that you need to make sure your agents are running with the right context at the right time. But again, with agents, I think it's easier to interoperate, right? With connectivity. And in nCino, I believe that's true. So, obviously we have MCPs, APIs, and we've got the appropriate tools for external agents to connect with nCino. And that's a big part of our roadmap and a big part of our strategy. But also on the other side, as an industry, we also need to make sure we need to make this secure, right? And a lot of these protocols are new. MCP is still a new protocol, right? A2A is still a new protocol. So with those protocols, how do you make sure that you enforce identity on agents? How do you still enforce zero trust principles that we have from the good old cloud architecture days? How do you make sure that the agent has appropriate permissions for the actions it needs to do? So all of those things you need to govern and understand are going to be critically important. So yes, interoperability is going to be really important. I do think there is a danger of institutions going with agent sprawl. And I also do think there's a danger of overly just being reliant on one provider, right? So I think that interoperability is going to be really important. But I go back to it at the end of the day, we're in the business of banking. In the business of banking, you've got core systems that do core things for you. I don't think that's going to change. I think what's going to be different is it's probably easier to interoperate with between them. You're just going to make sure you choose your partners wisely in that lens.
Will, greatly appreciate your time and your thoughts as always. Appreciate you joining us today.
No, appreciate it.